Welcome to Live Like an Acrobat. I'm your host, Shenea Stiletto, two-time World Acrobatic Gymnastics Champion, USA Gymnastics Hall of Fame member, and Cirque artist. I'm also an advocate for rain. On each episode of the Live Like an Acrobat podcast, I discuss acro handstanding in terms of training tips, coaching, and I explore circus and acrobatic gymnastics competitive life as I have lived it from past to current, and I theorize on what the future may bring in these fields. On each episode of the Live Like an Acrobat podcast, I will bring you insight through my own experiences, which are rooted in a perspective built on social justice advocacy and how these important issues continue to intersect between the circus arts and acrobatics competitive world at large. On each episode, I have the pleasure of discussing these various narratives with a variety of fascinating special guests. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the Live Like an Acrobat podcast. Please consider a donation to encourage the continuation and evolution of this podcast. The details of how to donate are located in the show notes. Please make sure to check out the circuspreneurblog.com for extended conversations and interactive content of each episode of the Live Like an Acrobat podcast. I am available for handstand private sessions and workshops through aerialfitbodies.com, and in a new announcement, I'm also a Circo certified trainer. Check out Circo.co, a new circus school online international platform where you can learn hand balancing with me and learn so many other circus disciplines from trained cirque performers from all over the world. Check out my new vlog series, Think Like an Acrobat, which is available exclusively on Circus Talk as a pro series. It's offering pro tips to professionals within the circus arts industry. On the second episode of Think Like an Acrobat, out now on Circus Talk, I interview Cirque du Soleil clown and creative director of Beyond Recreation, Michael J. Garner, about how you can learn to resource for yourself by mastering virtual event planning. On this special holiday episode of the Live Like an Acrobat podcast, I interview founder and creator of Cirque Psych, Janelle Peters. Janelle Peters is a professional contortionist, aerialist, and coach based in Denver, Colorado. Janelle is an artistic chameleon and adapts to a wide variety of roles, genres, and theatrical tones. She has choreographed and performed in solo and ensemble acts, collaborating across the United States as well as internationally. She is a featured performer with Oakland's Vespertine Circus and has embodied roles as disparate as Fair Hermia in Midsummer Night's Circus in 2016, Brad Major's Rocky Horror Circus Show in 2016 and 2017, a shoe-eating zombie in No Graves, No Masters in 2019, a melancholy lake monster on Aerial Hoop, and a mind-bending octopus contortionist in High Tide in 2020. Janelle regularly performs with Moth Poetic Circus, Circus Nutcracker, and Alice in Wonderland, and was the education director at Moth Contemporary Circus Center in Denver, Colorado until 2020. Janelle coaches her aerial and flexibility students with a style informed by her background in dance and education theory. She empowers her students to identify and pursue their own goals while emphasizing the importance of safety and technique. Described as humorous, encouraging, exploratory, and warm, Janelle creates a personal connection with students that persists outside of the classroom. She works with all ages and skill levels and excels with students who are exploring their artistic identities. Janelle coaches act development with a unique perspective produced by her training as a therapist and in physical theater method, exploratory, unflinching, and holistic. Janelle is also at Cirque Psych on Instagram, where she provides psychoeducational materials directed at exploring and understanding our beautiful, complex circus minds. Janelle's work as at Cirque Psych helps create space for conversations about mental health, well-being, and social justice in the circus community. She provides tools, resources, and inspiration that reminds us of the ways our circus work and our well-being are deeply interconnected. In her Cirque Psych workshops, which are ongoing, Janelle offers mental health first aid for circus. Mental health struggles have been stigmatized in Western culture and in many athletic and other training spaces for generations. However, they are just as common as physical health struggles. These workshops help coaches and students to dismantle stigma and learn skills for supporting their students' and classmates' mental health while maintaining appropriate boundaries. Participants will gain vocabulary, specific strategies, and a better understanding of how common mental health difficulties can impact circus humans. You will leave feeling more confident and empowered to care for your community members even when they're struggling, and with resources for when their needs exceed your capacity or your role. Please welcome my special holiday guest, Janelle Peters, to the show. I want to open this episode of the Live Like an Acrobat podcast featuring special guest Janelle Peters of Circus with the powerful story of Martin Riddle, a Chinese pole artist who has transformed his grief from the death of his grandmother and father at the start of the pandemic into a powerful performance he's titled The Easy Path. Of his artistic approach to life's challenges, Martin reflects that it was quite hard to deal with so many rocks in my path, but life goes on and we need to deal with these obstacles. My art was the only way to handle the grief. Martin's performance piece is so powerful and stirring and will leave you with a sense of urgency to love and to love harder and deeper than you ever have or thought possible. Take a cue from Martin in accessing the healing power of your art and everything that makes you feel connected to the important things in life in any form that you can, no matter how restrictive or prohibitive elements outside of your control may be right now. Martin captures the beauty and complex grief that at times like these we can all relate to in the most unfortunate and fortunate of ways. Know that you are not alone in seeking refuge from the unknown right now, and that the community is with you and the community supports you. The link to view his breathtaking performance amongst the cascading nature of Norway will be located in the show notes. Hi, Janelle. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on to speak with us about Circus today. I just love that name. It's so perfect. How are you?
I'm doing really well, Shenea. Thank you so much. I'm honored and really excited to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. It's such a pleasure, Janelle. And I really wanted to have you on the podcast during this difficult time that is upon us with the holiday season. It's interesting because the holiday season for so many of us is about lifting up the world with our performances, but also missing out on holiday celebrations most times with our own families. And this is a first for so many of us within the circus community to be home. Yet the irony is that we still are not going to be able to commune with our families due to the lockdowns. And so I'd have to say it's a pretty radical time. You don't have your circus family to hold on to in person while you are struggling away from your family, and you don't have your work to access to maybe help you cope with other things around the holiday season that can usually be so triggering. So it's so odd all the way around. I think what you're doing with Circus is so valuable right now. Most times performing artists are struggling heavily with mental health issues and addiction, and our suicide rates are steadily higher than many other fields, but it really goes unnoticed and paid so little attention to. I remember there was a time a few years ago when Diablo artists were committing suicide, and it was deeply disturbing and very sad. And we as a community suffer so much in silence and have access to so little mental health assistance bouncing around. And also, I think wanting to preserve the preciousness of our art so we don't feel like we can reach out or that we should reach out. And I know that was a long breakdown, but I'm so concerned for artists out there right now trying to survive the storm of the pandemic and the hit on our industry. We suffer mentally when the market is doing really well. So we've got to be on extra notice as this year continues to show no mercy for everyone. There are pockets of performances and tons of innovation right now, but especially during the holidays, I think it's important to speak about how we are feeling and recognize that if we are not okay, that there are resources and that there are people out there that care and that think like you and live like you and have mental tools to help you through your struggles. So if you'd love to speak on that, Janelle, thank you.
I mean, I just want to sit here and clap and snap my fingers to everything that you're saying, Shenea. It's so accurate and such a big picture look at kind of the experience that a lot of performing artists and circus artists in particular are having right now. Um, and absolutely, it's as you said kind of at the beginning, not having, for me, it's the circus nutcracker. The circus nutcracker was my tradition ever since moving to Colorado, and this is the first year where I'm spending my, November and December in my house as opposed to in the theater and in the studio, and I'm not seeing the people I want to see. So, we can speak about like the circus community in general, but I'll say also everything you've mentioned, it hits home. It's personal for me as well. It's hard, it's painful and sad and disorienting for sure. And I know I'm not alone in feeling that way. So one of the main things that's important to me to do as Circ Psych is to create a space for and to kind of bring vocabulary in for these conversations around mental health, around well-being, around mental illness and mental health challenges. And I think that, you've hit the nail on the head that this is a time of year that's sort of, it's a perfect storm. We've got COVID going on, which has really impacted our industry. It's impacted our idea of what our futures may look like. It's really impacted our presence. We've got the holiday season, which is known to be difficult for folks who struggle with our mental health in general, just because of the change of pace and a lot of family conflict sometimes, or missing loved ones who are no longer with us. And then we've got the fact that we're in kind of the darkest part of winter. So those of us who experience seasonal affective depression or any kind of that vitamin D deficiency, it's just a perfect storm. We're kind of in the darkness before the dawn, literally, metaphysically, metaphorically. That's what I was trying to say. Um, and even listening to the news here in the United States, we've got a couple COVID vaccines on the horizon. That's sort of that springtime light. I'm seeing a big parallel, really, between where we are as an industry and as performers and where we are in the seasons. And for me, I find that kind of seasonality and that bigger perspective comforting and helpful. And I hope that maybe that can give a little light at the end of the tunnel for folks as well. You also mentioned resources, which is so important because one of the worst things for us as human beings is feeling alone. And one of the best things about Circus is being surrounded by your colleagues and fellow performers and your directors and your duo partners. And so many of us have lost access entirely or partially to that sense of community right now. And so knowing that we can be connected to support and to one another virtually, through online conversations, through social distanced outdoor events and experiences, it is not the same, but it is also not a permanent situation. I don't know if that really answers your question or speaks to what you're saying, but those are kind of my thoughts riffing off of what you had to say in the intro, Shenea.
I thought that was beautiful, Janelle. And to continue on, for those unfamiliar with Circ Psych, can you please enlighten us about your upcoming workshop and also explain what Circ Psych is all about and what inspired you to address mental health issues within the circus arts community at large?
Yeah, absolutely. So Circ Psych right now is an Instagram, and it is me. It is a one-person situation. I am a licensed social worker and a therapist, and I'm also a contortionist and an aerialist. And so I really have these two big lenses on the way that I look at the world, and I see so much overlap between what I learn and what I experience in the world of circus and what I've learned and what I've experienced in the world of working in mental health. So I created Circ Psych in response to a need that I saw in the circus field and the circus industry, where, we talk about our physical pains and aches and challenges and injuries and conditions very comfortably and freely with one another. You're like, oh, my neck hurts today. Oh, I sprained my ankle. And I wished that we could talk about the same challenges that we face with our mental health with the same camaraderie and feeling of mutual support and the same kind of like, oh yeah, that happened to me. I've been there. Try this. This helped me. But we don't usually. Mental health kind of gets put into a little corner, a little shame corner sometimes. And there's a bit of a taboo against talking about mental health and mental illness and challenges. And I just think that we're better than that and we can do better than that. And so I started Circ Psych just as a way to provide what's called psychoeducation, which is just information and knowledge and analogies and little tidbits about our brains and mental health and common theories in mental health and psychology and different kinds of therapeutic, treatments and exercises. And it's gotten, a really positive response. I've had a lot of folks reach out saying that it was very impactful for them, that my posts are really helpful for them. We get good discussion on some of the posts. Um, and I'm laughing because one of the things that I say a lot on Circ Psych, just based on my own experience, is that, circus folks, we face a lot of challenges. And we are the kind of people who seem to like to lean into challenges. We want to do the things that seem impossible. We want to do them beautifully. And we want to do them on a stage in front of hundreds of observers. Um, so we experience greater challenges, but I also see us as being so creative and resilient and connected and adaptable. And just the other day, a paper came out, a scientific paper. One of the authors is my colleague Floor Van Rens, who's just incredible. And it was a survey of mental health among circus artists. And it was really kind of groundbreaking. We haven't had this data accessible that was specific to circus artists before. And one of the sentences in the discussion of that paper that stood out to me is, circus artists experience lower levels of mental health, but also higher levels of psychological resilience than the general population. And I just sat back and I was like, yeah, I know. Yes, of course. And so we're only just at a place where we're starting to get kind of the scientific data to say the things that I think we kind of all already know. And hopefully that will help to make those conversations more grounded in reality, and more popular and more prolific and more common. But in the meantime, where I see myself as a social worker specifically is in that space between the scientific research and the individual experience. And I like to try to bridge that gap and bring in the care and the awareness and the thoughtfulness and the healing that needs to happen for individual and groups of circus folks.
Why do you think it's so difficult for the Circ community to admit when we are suffering and in pain, Janelle?
I mean, it's going to be different for different people because when we think about the circus community, we're not homogenous. There are a lot of different nationalities and genders and ethnicities and experiences and backgrounds. And so I would never want to say like, oh, it's this one reason for the whole circus community. That said, we tend to be the folks who have a habit of perfectionism. We are performers. We are people who, could be in a very uncomfortable physical position, but we're smiling for the audience. And I think that bleeds into the way that we conduct ourselves off stage as well, to a certain extent. We have that power and that ability to kind of glamorize and fool the world. And I think that sometimes we use it more than maybe is good for us. I also know that folks, in the circus industry often live really precarious lives. And if we were to, not show up for a gig for a mental health day, or if we were to skip a week of training because we were really depressed or anxious, we would lose jobs. We would lose positions in companies. We don't have the infrastructure to take care of either our physical or our mental health that a lot of other industries have. And so that sense of needing to push through and needing to show no weakness just in order to survive and to live and to have your career, I think is very present for a lot of us.
Yes, I agree. And I also wanted to ask, what are some resources that you feel artists could use to move through mental suffering and also grief. We can experience a lot of loss in our careers with leaving shows we love, leaving performers we love, leaving countries or cities we love. How do you think we can healthily approach our kind of never-ending grief cycle, as I like to call it, so that instead of loss, we carry on with inspiration and valuable memories that can support us in an aware and mindful future? And I don't mean that in a way to suggest that grieving is a bad thing. I just don't feel like artists usually recognize, like, oh, this is unprocessed grief that I'm feeling over something that may seem, maybe trivial or just a part of the job, as you just stated, how we don't have backups. We don't have the luxuries of saying this is an actual human real emotion that I'm feeling, that I want to be able to move through and have guidance in and around how to process. We usually know I'm the only one here. I have to show up today. And if I don't show up, I could suffer prolonged effects to my career. And that can affect me for years to come. And we do know that we are in a very sensitive environment where things stay with you much stronger and more negatively, I would say, than they do in other environments, in terms of making sure that things don't come back on you in terms of reputation. We are a small group. People speak on things and people share things, and things can travel fast. But I do find most oftentimes a lot of us are grieving in a lot of different capacities and ways. And so what are some other resources you feel like we could use, Janelle, for that?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, specifically for grief, and I'm not totally sure if you're asking for like inner resources and skills or like external resources, but I'll offer a few of each. And you kind of named it already, Shenea, with grief is actually taking that time and recognizing the process of grieving and of mourning a loss. And even if you have a bright, shiny new, show or contract coming up, the fact that you're leaving the show you were on or the community that you were with is still a loss. And I think that we often put pressure on ourselves to only look at the positive and only look at the upward trajectory, and that does leave a lot of, as you said, unprocessed grief, and feelings of loss that we haven't just sat with, and really taking time to, I tell this to my therapy clients a lot, like, have you taken some time to just ugly cry? And people will laugh, but it's so powerful and beneficial to have that physiological release of the emotion. We're such physical people, and we know the power of moving the body with intention and moving the body in a way that expresses emotionally. And this is kind of the other side of that, which is really letting the release of the emotion happen physiologically and somatically through the body. So really, truly, like setting aside time, you can put it on your calendar to ugly cry if you need to. If you can ugly cry, it's probably beneficial for you to do it. And then one day you'll set aside time and you'll sit down, you'll be like, I don't have it in me. It's not coming up anymore. I think I've moved through that. I've let it move through me. That's one of my favorite ways to approach grief and loss and sadness and heartbreak, is it's to keep barfing it up basically until there's none left. But with regard to external resources, obviously, I recommend individual therapy. I have always found it very beneficial for myself. It is not the only modality or the only way to care for your mental health. And, in our culture, our more like Western, white supremacist, patriarchal culture, there's a lot of value on being able to talk or write through your thoughts and feelings. And some people, that's not the best way for them to explore their feelings. But I like individual psychotherapy very, very much. There are a lot of therapists, especially now due to COVID, who are available virtually or online and have, very flexible schedules. So even when we go back to being able to travel and tour and be in different places at different times, that access to consistent mental health from the same therapist hopefully will remain. That is a little silver lining that I'm seeing for sure for our Circus community. And then, if you're really in crisis, there are national suicide hotlines and state suicide hotlines. The phone numbers vary from state to state, but you can do a quick Google search of, Colorado suicide crisis or Colorado crisis line. And a lot of them now also have text lines. So you don't even have to be verbally out loud on the phone with someone in case you're in a situation where maybe you have less privacy. you can be texting with someone to get some support if you are really in that crisis place. Of course, I recommend Circ Psych on Instagram, and then a couple other social media resources that I really like are Circus Psychology, which is Fleur Van Rens. She's the researcher whose paper just came out. I also really like the dance psychologist, who's not circus specific, but has a really beautiful strengths-based, grounding, stay in the moment kind of take on thinking and talking about mental health for dancers. And I think it's very approachable for circus artists as well.
Mm, thank you. Yeah, I last year, to share a personal experience of mine, when I was working last year in Morocco, I had an incredibly difficult time there where things didn't go well with an agent. And actually, like while I was there, I actually went and I sought to get some in-person therapy. And I've done that before, and I've actually known artists in all different parts of the world that have actually done that, where they are not in their country of origin, as most oftentimes a lot of us are not, and they have sought therapy in person to be able to deal with the crisis that they are having on a contract, because we can get into quite difficult experiences. And that's happening, even now. There's stories coming out even right now of artists working in conditions that aren't great, and working in shows that are not treating them well, even during this time where you think that things would maybe be so heightened within the circus world that people would be on best behavior. But that is not the case. And so I want to remind people that there is no shame in that. I sought out somebody that I felt like had the credentials. I did something called Emotion Sync, which I'm pretty sure you've heard of, Janelle. And I used that to work through until I actually could get out of country to my next contract. But there was a period of time that I could not go home, and I did not have a good transition point. And that was quite shocking, because that was like, it's much later in my career, and that was, a situation I actually didn't expect to have. I was quite shocked with the way that things went. But because you're in a space where you're not around people that you know, and that you're not around others that you feel like you can trust, especially in those times. I know a lot of artists that have worked and struggled through a lot of experiences like that, where they shouldn't be alone. And so I'm very happy to say that was so advantageous for me in moving through. I think that I would have been more traumatized and scarred from that situation had I not gone to therapy with somebody while I was still in Morocco, to help me to facilitate to the next contract, because we can carry a lot of things into our next show, and then that adds to lessening our experience of something that could be really great and amazing. And I think also too just lead to all sorts of different issues that might come up in our work and affect our work in negative ways, that we, again, don't want to have to undo the effects of for sometimes maybe years to come, as I've also seen that as well. Thank you so much for sharing those inner and outer tools, Janelle, and also to remark on the paper that they are doing, that they just came out with. I think that is a brilliant step in the right direction. I hope to see more of that, more of those stats, and more of those being made publicly, so that it can influence bigger corporations and bigger companies to continue to recognize how much suffering and how little mental health awareness that we have in and around the circus performing arts as well. I also wanted to ask Janelle, because you're speaking about tools, inner and outer, and you spoke about this a little bit, but to give us maybe some examples of how you use the therapy or your tools on yourself as a performer and as an instructor. Can you give us some examples or experiences or specific events that you've had where, that would be familiar to all of us also too, as performers and as instructors, were very beneficial for you that we can use ourselves?
Yeah. Shenea, first of all, I just want to take a moment and recognize how painful that experience you had in Morocco sounds. And just to say, like, I am so sorry to hear that happened to you. And I'm so glad that you felt confident enough to seek out support and that it was helpful for you, because that just sounds like a really rough time. And I don't want to just glaze past that. It sounds significant. And thank you for being willing to share that.
Thank you so
Um,
much, Janelle.
of
I appreciate
course, yeah, of course. And when I'm thinking about, well, how do I use my therapeutic tools in my circus life? That's such it's funny because it seems like a really obvious question, but I haven't like thought of it in those terms before. One of the things that comes quickly to mind is an autonomous nervous system hack that I really like. It's a way to regulate the nervous system into more of a down regulation and a calm state. So if you're nervous or anxious or stressed out or in a situation that's difficult or tense for whatever reason, taking account of the breath and making sure that the exhale lasts longer than the inhale. It's very simple to do, and it has a really profound effect on the nervous system. And if you're able to kind of maintain that longer exhale than inhale, it's very calming, and can help you kind of get back into your thinking brain rather than your reactive lizard brain. And so I think of times when I've been working in situations that were tense or where there was, instructions that were unclear or when there was communication that was frustrating, or even when I was just about to go on stage with a new act or with a new skill in my act that I was feeling nervous about, that autonomic nervous system hack was really helpful. And that can be helpful just in day to day life as well. When you do notice that you're a little keyed up or a little tense, taking just a few breaths with that long exhale. I mean, again, it's such a simple thing to do, but it's a very, very profound impact on the body and on the mind. Another thing that I think is really helpful is a skill that I use a lot with folks who experience anxiety or depression, especially kind of around the the there's the 10 cognitive biases of cognitive behavioral therapy. And one of the ones that's really common is catastrophizing or like worst case scenario thinking. And I think that in circus, because we have to be so safety oriented, literally to stay alive, we do have patterns and habits of thinking that are like, okay, but what's the worst that could happen? Like, if this goes wrong, like how wrong will it go? Like, will it be catastrophic? And I think there are times when those patterns are helpful, but I think that they can often get misapplied to situations in which there isn't an actual threat, but then we start to respond to that situation as if there is one. And so the skill, kind of the cognitive behavioral therapy skill, is to ask yourself, what's actually real right now? And it's this like dropping into the present moment. In my mind, I might be thinking like, okay, I'm trying to think of a scenario and I'm having trouble off the top of my head, but I will like spin out a scenario all the way to including like my rigging failing and me falling and breaking my neck and being in the hospital and not having health insurance and, my parents having to like fly to a foreign country to get me. Like, I'm just like, I'm getting into that like worst case scenario mindset. And then I sit back and I'm like, oh, I'm sitting cross-legged on the stage floor listening to instructions right now. That's what's happening. All that stuff that just came like that I just had that physiological reaction to. My heartbeat was like even just describing the theoretical situation. My face is flushed, my heart is going faster. None of that's real, right? And so being able to be very, very present in the moment is such an important skill. And it's something I think that we have, most of us as circus performers, especially folks who are jugglers, contortionists, aerialists, where you can't be distracted from what you're doing in the moment. But we don't always remember to apply that full development in the moment and in the present situation when we're not performing our skills. And so that's kind of a place that we can take our circus skills and apply them for our mental health. So I guess we've gone full circle, mental health for circus and circus for mental health.
Yes, that's brilliant. And that scenario that you used, actually, I had a guest on a few months ago, Sam Panda, and that very same thing happened to her. She fell and she was in a foreign country and she broke her neck. Ugh. And she survived it and she came back, but her journey is quite something to listen to. And we know a lot of performers. I unfortunately know too many performers. I say if you know one, that's too many, but I know, several performers where that exact same scenario did happen to them, where they, almost died while performing, and then they did have to come back. And that also speaks to what I was going to say next, which is, I really believe that our actual circus environment is the source of many of the mental health issues within our community. And unfortunately, it's such a hard business for the majority of circus artists. And as with anything, a small majority may exist unaffected or unburdened, but that's not to minimize that you can't suffer acutely if everything is going well for you. That's a fact. But what are some factors that you think are specific to our circus community that exacerbate our tendencies to suffer emotionally and psychologically? And, not just the fact, like we're saying, that many acts are literally risking their lives with each performance. That does and can weigh on you. And it's okay to say that, even though it's taboo to say. People really want to hear that no artists are ever afraid to work or to perform. And that's really not true. And I'd also like to add to that for sure lack of boundaries in our environment, I think, breeds a lot of circumstances that are very stressful for our mental well-being too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the risk of so many of our acts and our skills is huge. And in order to be able to, once a day or 3 times a day, depending on the show that you're in, go out there and do something that could seriously harm you or end your life if something goes wrong. I mean, that is a huge stressor. It is going to affect your nervous system and your mental health. And so having those nervous system regulating techniques like that extended exhale, meditation practice, anything that you can do so that you can have, an elastic nervous system that can be amped up in the moment that it needs to be to execute the skill, but that then can return to a baseline where you can sleep and eat and think clearly is going to be so important. I love that you just named lack of boundaries, because absolutely, yes, that is a huge, huge factor in our industry. We have an almost entirely unregulated industry, which, as far as I know, it's probably one of the last almost entirely unregulated industries in the world. And yet it's one with such high physical risks and high emotional and social risks for the people who participate in it. And I think that, circus artists, especially individual artists, are often left in precarious positions where a lot of advocacy is expected of them if they're going to be able to, let me change the way that I want to say that. They're going to have to be expert self-advocates, in addition to being expert performers and expert travelers and expert nervous system soothers. And it starts to be a lot of things that people need to be able to do really well consistently to protect their safety. And that ability to do something very difficult very well consistently, again, is another set of stressors. I think, when you look at the incidence of sexual assault, just like weird shenanigans that doesn't really qualify as assault, but still definitely causes harm in our industry, it's incredibly high. And I think that, for folks entering into the industry, it can be a really scary wake up when something like that happens to them or to someone they know. And that trauma, if that experience is experienced directly, and even the vicarious trauma of knowing that it has happened to someone that you know and care about, or seeing it happen before your eyes, those things affect us as well. I'm not sure if I feel like I've kind of gone off into the weeds. Do you have a question, or is there something else that you were trying to get at there?
I think that you did it. I think that you answered that brilliantly, Janelle. And I think it's important, like what you're saying, that we continue to dispel the myth of the unflinching, mechanistic performer out there that I'm constantly being labeled with. I'm sure you are too. And we all know what that feels like. And I'm constantly trying to remind people that we are human and have human issues, and that we take a lot on in this medium. And I think it only hurts us moving forward to feel sacrificed for the art of it, and really makes no sense to me in being okay with others projecting unrealistic expectations onto us, because we are already doing the impossible with our work, like you said, and adding the extra superhero status to us doesn't serve us. And it does serve for the outside world to experience more of our humanity, so that they want to empathize with us more instead of just being entertained by us. And I think that will serve to help project more regulation for us, as you stated. I think that the burden of having to be a jack of all trades within this becomes much more to bear than we are usually able to vocalize, and that those coming into this environment, like what you said too, are not at all usually adequately prepared for these constant burdens of having to be and do everything. People think that we just arrive on the stage and that someone else is taking care of things for us, but that's not true. You're going in and out of all of these very tricky environments, like what you were speaking about too, Janelle, with no one really there to vouch for you. We're dealing with a lot of independent and private companies and corporations who have siphoned off most of the control to themselves, and they stay that way. And there is not usually anyone knocking on that door from the outside as an overseer, really in any country, asking, are you okay as the artist? Or how are things really going on in there? I mean, it's very few and far between. And thank God we have seen a renaissance taking, place throughout this year. But it's not enough. We are just really at the tip of an iceberg. And we know, you and I know, that we need some kind of union, and we need some kind of laws and regulations that are not just things that serve an arena union once we travel through there in America. That's not going to cut it. That doesn't help their performers. And definitely when you're going in and out of country, it doesn't serve you to not have anybody there that feels like they are going to be held to a legal standard for your care. And again, understanding and recognizing that because you are your own agent, your own support system, your own choreographer, your own producer, your own organizer, your own creative source, your own travel agent, your own everything. You become at some point in this business everything and anything, depending on what you need to do. You're your own rigger. You're the one that has to be responsible, for the things that go on that are sometimes out of your control, depending on what company you're working with and how difficult that is. And I know that for a lot of people going back into work right now, I think there's a lot of anxiety outside and not being able to work, but also too the heightened anxiety of going into a circus world as well that is changing so much now. And that I think also too, we all have different expectations right now going into work. And I think that's also too creating a level of anxiety for a lot of circus performers of what is the environment going to be like now, or is it going to be a lot of the same as it was before? And how do I also too deal with the paradox of wanting to be still in this environment, but wanting it to change and maybe knowing that it's not changing as much as I wish that it would in a lot of ways, but still having to show up there because it's what I love to do. And it's also my job, and also being forced in some ways to maybe take work in a capacity that maybe we don't fully want to do, but the environment now is oversaturated. So many people are out of work. So many people want to come back into work. So many people want to make it. Some people I know are probably feeling anxious about having to give up things that maybe they worked hard during the quarantine, that they don't know if companies are actually going to match that once they go back into these environments. And I think that's, that produces a lot of anxiety as well for us too. So I think there's so much going on right now that's new and that's old. We have a lot of innovation. We have a lot of traditionalist thinking as well. And I know even for myself, I'm weighing a lot of that kind of back and forth of how do we all continue to reinforce these new boundaries going forward without being fearful of how that affects our work, how it affects our journey, and how do we do that with support? Because again, what I think we deserve in this business and what I feel like, needs to continue with the empowering like you're doing, Janelle, with artists is to show them you can psych yourself. You can therapy yourself. You can use those resources that are out there on your own because most likely, even still now, those are not going to be offered to you in the way that you deserve them. It's not that you don't deserve them. It's that they are not being offered to you in the way that you deserve them, because you don't deserve to suffer in an environment that does not take care of you, but sources so much goodness from you. And I think, again, circling back around, you said we are one of the last mediums that is so underregulated. And I don't think that can be lost on any of us. And I think it's very important for everyone to remember that if you are struggling right now, know that, there is not a big network created around circus arts to support you in the way that you should be supported, and an environment that you've given so much to that is, doesn't really have a lot of platforms to help us land very gently or softly. So if you would like to speak on that, if there's anything in that I said that you'd like to speak on more too, I would love that.
I mean, there are like 20 things you said that I would just love to dig into, but I think one of the things you said that really hit home with me was there are so many new things and there are so many old things. And absolutely, yes, the global pandemic is something that none of us have done before. And the way that has affected companies, Cirque du Soleil filing for bankruptcy protection and like laying everybody off, like it's unprecedented, that in our lifetime. Although certainly such things have happened in the past. Circus is old as heck, right? I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on this podcast. Am I allowed to swear on this podcast?
Yes, you are.
Oh, fantastic. So, there's stuff happening in the industry that is unprecedented to anybody working in the industry now. I also think that, our circus ancestors might be looking at us and smiling a little and being like, oh, look at you with your airplanes and your like easily like stress testable rigging equipment and all of these things you have that make your lives so much easier or simpler maybe than they have been in the past. And at the end of the day, the things that circus artists need to be able to do to keep ourselves safe and thriving and connected are the same as they've always been. And that's to build strong and healthy, supportive relationships with other folks in our industry. That's to be able to know and to hold our boundaries in a way that doesn't harm others. And that's being able to know and to abide by our values as individuals. And when we bring it back to kind of those fundamental skills that are unaffected by whatever is happening globally and sociopolitically and economically in the world, when we bring it back to our relationships to ourselves and others, that's where I feel like the rubber hits the road. And that's the area that I am most interested in my work as Circ Psych, because the strategy for handling going back to work during COVID is going to depend very much on the person and on the situation and on what country they're in and what language they speak and their economic status and so many things. But at the end of the day, the question is a question about boundaries and a question about values and safety and relationships. And that's where we can keep returning to and keep building our skills. And the better that our deep inner skills in those areas are, the more we're going to be able to navigate and negotiate and manage and make choices that help us thrive, no matter what the situation that we're in is.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. Yes, exactly. I love that, about no matter what the situation is, it's that core, those core tools, that foundation that is strong so that, whatever is happening, you have something to hold on to. And I've worked on that over the years in my career in understanding that, because we are in an environment that has a lot of tides in it. I always say, the circus, it's hard on us even when things are going good. So,
Yeah.
it's a lot even when things are streamlined and working out. And like what you said, when you have the shiny contract and, things are seemingly going well, or you have like a cushier position. And like you said, too, it's also recognizing how far we've come and the things that we do have rights to and the things that are better. They're much better than they even were just for me when I started performing 20 years ago. So, even with you saying like drawing on ancestors, even when I'm with younger performers, they say, well, even 20 years ago, that was not happening. Like that for you is much easier than it even was just 20 years ago, even when it was like 10 years ago. And then also recognizing the things that are struggling that are worse now for them in different ways that we didn't have those uphill battles with when we started out. If we're a bit older, if we're from like a different generation. But I think that as well, like having those foundational tools that can sustain you, because when you are knocked out of your center, when you are not around people that speak your language, which is most often when you're not around people that have same values or that think like you or that emote like you or that experience trauma or tragedy like you. It's very important to be incredibly strong and grounded and mindful within who you are so that you don't get carried away by what we know can be the superficiality of this business, no matter how beautiful it may seem. So I think that's very important for you to dial that in for us, Janelle, to remind us about the consistency of showing up for ourselves so that no matter what the environment is or how it's teetering, whatever teeter board you may be on, that you're still, you've got that balance going on there. And so I wanted to also ask, this will be airing after your workshop, Janelle. So how can those that are interested in CircSpsych connect with the program if they've not gotten to this particular workshop that you're doing for the holidays? And how do you facilitate things ongoing with CircSpsych?
Yeah, absolutely. So the workshop that Shenea is talking about is I guess when you listen to this, it will be back on December 21st, back in the past. But when we're recording, it is still in the future. Is the mental health first aid for Circus workshop. And what this is a workshop that's designed to help build comfort and confidence and skills around talking about mental health and mental illness and around supporting community members who might be struggling with their mental health. And so it's a workshop about where the goal is that everybody who leaves the workshop feels more equipped and more skillful and more able to step in and be supportive should somebody in their environment or in their community be experiencing a mental health crisis. And so some of the things that we work on specifically are supporting somebody who is experiencing a panic attack, talking with somebody who is thinking of ending their life. We do a lot of myth busting around eating disorders, which help to kind of talk as well to some of the bigger systemic issues like racism, sexism, heteronormativity, homophobia that affect all of us in our circus bodies, not just the skinny white girls who haven't had a lunch, And it's really important to me that we bust those myths and that we get practice talking about things like suicide, like panic attacks, so that they don't feel overwhelming and frightening when we witness them, or even if they do feel overwhelming and frightening, we feel capable to step in and to provide even some support, even if that might be handing somebody off to support that's going to be a little more specific for their care. So that's the workshop that's coming up. And I offer that workshop periodically. So if you're listening and you're like, oh, I wish I hadn't missed it, there will be other chances. The way to stay in touch and up to date on what's going on with CircSpsych is really just to follow the Instagram. Most stuff is happening through there and is being announced through there for the time being. There's other stuff in the works, but I'm taking it slowly for the moment. So that Instagram is at CircSpsych, and it's CIRQUE_PSYCH. So you can follow that there. And then there is also a Facebook group for CircSpsych, and it's at CircSpsych, same as the Instagram. That Facebook group I'm starting to phase out just as I use Facebook less and less. But there's still stuff happening there. You can catch announcements, and there's a little bit of a community for discussion and conversation there as well if you're interested.
Thank you so much. And listeners, make sure you catch the workshop that Janelle will be holding in the future. So it's good to know that it's ongoing, that it's just not a one-time thing, that you can continue to connect and journey with Janelle through CircSpsych as our processes of healing and understanding how better to take care of ourselves are journeys. And it's not a race. It's a day-to-day thing. And it's good, I think, again, to lean into CircSpsych if you aren't a part of the community that is not working right now, as some of us are working right now and getting opportunities and up and moving. Some of us are still in the process of continuing to innovate and creating new platforms for ourselves. And some of us don't have access to any kind of platforms at all right now, through innovation or through new work that's coming. And we don't know when that next thing is going to be. So I think a very advantageous thing you can do is lean into CircSpsych and get that assistance. And from there, you could potentially flower into other innovations that you maybe haven't thought of through some helpful guidance there that can help you to move forward in your career in whatever way that's going to be for you. I wanted to close the interview, Janelle, with this last statement, and then I'll ask you one more question after that. But you've spoken about this, but this is more of like a timely thing of present moment and presently over the holidays and such. But if an artist is confused and feels broken right now, what's the healthiest step forward you feel they could take to wisely turn the corner? I know for sure if you haven't cried this year, as you said, Janelle, for your hopes and dreams lost and fear of the future, it would be a good time to allow yourself to do so, to release that, because it's okay to acknowledge how outside of our control life is and how it can be so cruel at times, even when we have a silver lining during the storms. I think it's important to cry for all of the shows you didn't have this year, all of the missed cues, all of the missed nuances of your performances and inflections on stage and character, and also for the shows that will no longer exist or that didn't happen, and the artists you will never meet because of the redirect of this year. That's a really powerful thing to accept and release, and I've done my own journeying through that. So what advice can you give as we close out the podcast, Janelle?
Yeah, in addition to what you said of just accept that it is grief that you're experiencing and call it what it is and let it be as bad as it feels. Don't try to push it down or hide it or ignore it or work around it. The thing that I would say is connect. Reach out to your friends, your colleagues, your family, whoever it is that makes you feel loved and seen and safe. Anybody that you think might empathize with your experience. The more connected we are, the stronger we are. And like we talked about, I feel like we've come full circle in the interview, but that sense of isolation that is so prevalent right now is one of the worst things for us as humans. And it's especially hard for us as circus humans who are so used to working in teams and collaborating. So, talk to somebody, talk to anybody that you love and trust and care about, or even somebody that you like and want to get to know better. This is the time to build those relationships that can be true and deep and based on mutual experiences and values, and that don't have to be simply transactional or simply a temporary on the same show relationship. Dig into not just yourself, but your community.
That's so beautiful. Thank you, Janelle. And is there anything that we didn't touch on that you would like to add to this conversation that you think is important, Janelle?
I mean, we touched on so many things. I just am so happy to be here with you and to kind of like hear your thoughts and your feelings and experiences as well. I feel like if we were to sit back and listen to this, we could have another hour-long conversation about any one of 20 things. But I think that we have touched perfectly on everything we needed to. And I would leave it there. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Janelle, for sharing CircSpsych with us, for creating CircSpsych. I think that that's one of the most important contributions to the circus community, that we've had in a very long time. Really, I do. I think that, even though we journey in some ways very futuristically as a circus arts community, there's things about us that are incredibly archaic and backwards and so behind things that are sometimes happening within, our modern society and, maybe holistic tools and new ways of approach and looking at our medium and at our workspaces, that we really need more time, and we need more people like you, I think, that are, using all of these different other brilliant skills that you have, and integrating that into the circus experience. And I think that Circ Psych is so beneficial. I think that this is something that could be really beneficial if you're listening, to tap into this during this holiday season when things can feel especially difficult and hard on us as human beings, and as Janelle reminded us, as circus humans. So thank you again, Janelle. I appreciate you coming on, for sharing all of your wisdom, all of your perspectives and your insights. And yes, I could go on and on and on, because I know that we both have so many experiences that we could share about our careers and about how, our mental health intersects with our careers, because they are not islands onto themselves. Your mental health is just as important as you showing up with a new, shiny, cool, interesting circus act, circus skill, circus show, or circus tool, whatever you want to call it. Remember that you are your most important, I would say, I don't like to say product, but mechanism. You're your most important organism, and nothing else matters if everything about you isn't going right, no matter how everything might seem to be. If things eventually start going well for you and things start picking up for you, remember that this is the most important part that you can do while things are down, and to really reinforce your mental health so that you can have a really strong, flourishing, positive career that you can sustain and that you can be proud of, and that I think, can serve the larger community and inspire others. And we're here to inspire, and thank you for inspiring us, Janelle, and teaching us how we can continue to inspire from within, and how we can gain inspiration from without, which is, sometimes for us as circus performers, we are just, we like to do everything ourselves, and we feel like we can do it all. And it's because we can, and we are innovative, but please seek out help. You do not have to do things all by yourself. And as brilliant as you are as a creator, know that there is a community that supports you and that's here for you, and lean into Circ Psych. So thanks again, Janelle, for coming on. And I really appreciate you.
Thank you again for having me. And likewise, I appreciate you, and everybody listening. You're so not alone. Whatever it is that you're feeling, you are so not alone. So reach out and connect with your community.
I want to dedicate this special holiday episode of the Live Like an Acrobat podcast, which will bring us into the new year, to my former meditation teacher and mentor, who you can follow and find at the Happiness Warrior 108 on Instagram. And I want to do so because he decided to make his transition just a few weeks ago. And it has had such a profound effect on me, because he had such a profound effect on my life. I met him and received my mantra through transcendental meditation during the crash of '08 into '09, which was the other downfall of the entertainment industry and the circus arts industry, though not, of course, in the exact same way, but it was a very difficult time. And I lost a lot during that year, and it's so similar to this year. It's almost stunning. I think that it's somewhat unbelievable if you've lived through both and are in the performing arts and an artist, and surviving this wave. And so meeting him at that time was so crucial to me moving forward, because he really gave me so much to look forward to and to give meaning to what was happening in the state of the world. And I really value that time in my life. And so to now be at this time, these years later, and be going through something very similar globally, and to lose his presence on this planet is just so striking. And I thought it was really important to acknowledge just how much of an incredible person that he was and still is, because his presence lives on through all of the people that he touched and mentored throughout his very long career of being a meditation teacher and being a yoga practitioner. And he was so global. He was originally from Australia, and I came to encounter him through various friends in Los Angeles, but he was so global. I mean, just thousands and thousands upon thousands of people have been touched by him. And I even say that in some ways his social media following in that way doesn't do it justice, but he, I think, would laugh and say, well, yeah, I mean, he so didn't care, and his stuff was real about, you know, very real-to-real person contact, and so it can't even be measured. But I say that just because we live in times where people put so much value and place so much value on things of that nature in terms of what you think your impact is in this world, and how that still has such little to do with it in so many ways. And I wanted to also acknowledge his time and his presence on this planet, and in the way that he left with doing this episode around grieving and around loss and around mental health and around how we manage our grief in this world and as artists. And Will, which is his name, you'll see when you go to his profile, was one of the most incredible people I've ever met. He really is one of those rare souls that comes along every once in a while, and I say that because I have met so many fascinating people in my life and journey as a circus artist. I have been all over the world since I was very little, and I've really met just the most fascinating individuals, and he definitely stands out to one of the top individuals that I've ever met in terms of groundedness, in terms of magneticism, in terms of character, in terms of physicality, in terms of how people just absolutely loved him and only always had just wonderful things to say about him, and how stunning he was, and freedom loving, and lived on his own terms. And he was such a cool person too, and he wasn't what people sometimes regard as granola in the spiritual community. He was very grounded and of this world and modern, and had a very, very beautiful way in reminding you of the practicality of the mindfulness and the meditation that you were doing and how to use that in your life. He was very practical, and I really enjoyed that about him and respected that about him. And he had a presence where he was just very much open and available to anything, and he really lived that. And he was a very statuesque guy, and a very man's man in, I think, every sense of the word, but incredibly feminine also, with just a great balance of both, and just very open and free-loving. So I, again, brought his story into this because there's so many people searching for answers in and around him leaving this planet so young, and with so much more to give in this way. However, if you are a part of communities where you don't believe in death, and you know that energy never dies, and that, you know, maybe your relationship to that person has changed, but their presence remains the same, just in a different form. He's still giving. Obviously, he has me speaking through this podcast and acknowledging him here. And I say this again to say that if you are the artistic one the revolutionary one in your group, in your family, in your field, with your friends, if you are the adaptable one, if you're the cool one, if you are the progressive one, if you are the open one, if you are the rebel, if you're the one that everyone comes to for inspiration, if you're the one that everyone comes to for advice, if you're the one that everybody thinks has it all together and has all the answers and who ends up thriving and coping when others don't, if you are the person, the individual that sees yourself in spiritual terms, in otherworldly terms, as the creative, as the go-to person, as one of the people that everyone thinks just has it all, who's grounded, who's lovable, who's funny, who's charming, who just shows everybody the way that hasn't been done before, then please, if you're suffering and you think those things about yourself, please reach out to others. Please do. Please don't struggle alone. Please don't think that you're so interesting and adaptable and that you've built up such a reservoir of doing interesting, innovative things in your life that you're not vulnerable to acute suffering and to taking on burdens that you don't feel you can share and express with others. If that's what I'm learning through the transition of Will, my former meditation teacher, in all of his marvelousness, and not to say this in a bad way and not to say it in a negative way, because we don't know what others are supposed to choose for themselves and how they choose that for themselves, because they have the freedom to do whatever they want in their lives, no matter how much we love them, no matter how much we revere them, no matter how much we think that they're the ones that we can all go to when we need help and we need assistance. So I wish you peace. I wish you a beautiful holiday. And I wish you, if you need to, and you check all those boxes, that you reach out to the ones that you feel you're usually shouldering those burdens for, because you're the fascinating individual that maybe has it all figured out, but definitely doesn't. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Live Like an Acrobat. The Live Like an Acrobat podcast is also available on Circus Talk, the inclusive, independent, and international online network for the circus industry. Circus Talk's mission is to create a level playing field for this industry and democratize access to information. Please consider subscribing to the Live Like an Acrobat podcast and to the circuspreneurblog.com, where you will find extended conversations and interactive content of each episode of the Live Like an Acrobat podcast. I'm your host, Shenea Stiletto, and until next time, please stay safe and stay healthy.